Providence Municipal Court, shortly after sunrise. The fluorescent lights flicker on with a clinical buzz, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the conditioned air. The room is a theater of the everyday, currently at half capacity, but filling with the specific gravity of civic anxiety. On the wooden benches, the city's demographic spreads out like a map. A nurse still wearing her scrubs from the graveyard shift, rubbing her temples, a contractor with drywall dust in his hair, anxiously checking a cracked phone screen, an elderly man folding a newspaper with precise, trembling hands. The ambient sound is a texture rather than a noise, the quiet shuffle of shoes, the rustle of summons papers being smoothed out on laps, the low murmur of rehearsed excuses being whispered to supportive spouses. At the helm of this ship sits Judge Frank Caprio. He is already settled behind the high bench, a figure of calm authority amidst the rising tide of nervousness. He adjusts his spectacles, his eyes scanning the stack of case files before him with a rhythm born of decades. He isn't just looking at violations, he is looking for the stories hidden between the lines of police shorthand. His expression is focused, serious, yet undeniably approachable. The face of a man who understands that the law is applied to humans, not robots. The clerk stands to his right, organizing the docket, the sharp snap of a clipboard echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. The machinery of the court is warming up, gears grinding slowly into motion. It feels like a standard docket. The air smells faintly of industrial floor wax and stale coffee. Routine hums in the corners. Yet, there is a subtle charge in the atmosphere today, a static electricity that prickles the back of the neck. Perhaps it is the way the light hits the state seal, or the unusual stiffness of the bailiff's posture near the side exit. While the room expects a morning of parking tickets and expired registrations, the silence holds a heavy breath. Judge Caprio pauses, his pen hovering over a document, and looks out at the gallery over the rim of his glasses. He senses it too, the invisible pressure of an approaching storm masked as an ordinary Tuesday. The stage is set, the players are taking their marks, and the curtain is about to rise on a collision that will test the very patience of the court. The heavy oak doors swung open, slicing through the low, rhythmic drone of the municipal proceedings. It wasn't a quiet entrance, it was a shift in atmospheric pressure. Preston Hayes III stepped into the harsh fluorescent wash of the courtroom like he was stepping onto the deck of a private yacht. He was tall, built with the lanky ease of someone whose physical exertion is purely recreational. His blonde hair was artfully disheveled, a chaotic mop that likely took 20 minutes and expensive product to perfect. He wore a sweatshirt, oversized slate gray, with a logo whispering a three-figure price tag, paired with denim distressed by design, not labor. In his right hand, a sleek smartphone glowed, his thumb scrolling idly even as he crossed the threshold of the Providence Municipal Court. He moved down the center aisle, ignoring the rows of wooden benches filled with anxious citizens clutching crumpled parking tickets. He didn't see the exhausted nurse in scrubs or the mechanic wiping grease from his knuckles. To Preston, they were merely background texture, static in his world of high-definition privilege. A faint, curling smile played on his lips. It wasn't a smile of greeting, it was a smirk of private amusement, a silent broadcast that suggested the very concept of this court was a joke he had just remembered. The clerk, a woman who had seen every variation of regret and defiance Providence had to offer, didn't look up immediately. She adjusted her glasses, paper rustling in the microphone. "Preston Hayes III," she announced, the syllables hanging heavy in the recycled air. Most people jump when their name is called here. They shuffle, they hunch, they apologize with their posture. Preston didn't jump. He slowed down. He took an agonizingly long beat to tap a final message on his screen before sliding the phone into his pocket, a gesture of deliberate, weaponized lethargy. He approached the podium not with the brisk walk of a defendant, but with the casual saunter of a customer browsing a boutique. He reached the microphone, the wood scarred from years of nervous gripping. Preston didn't grip it. He leaned one elbow on the stand, slouching slightly, and reached up to sweep a lock of blonde hair out of his eyes with a languid motion. Finally, he deigned to look up. His gaze met Judge Frank Caprio's. There was no fear in the boy's eyes, no recognition of authority, just a bored, glassy stare that treated the bench, the flag, and the judge himself as minor inconveniences. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, vibrating with the tension of a collision course set in motion. The clerk, a woman who has catalogued the city's minor sins for decades, adjusts her glasses. The paper in her hand seems heavier than usual, weighted down by the sheer density of the infractions. She begins, her voice a flat, procedural drone that typically lulls the room into a trance. "Mr. Hayes," she reads, the name echoing slightly off the wood paneling. "June 12th, 3:45 p.m., Elm Street." She pauses, letting the location settle. Everyone knows Elm Street. It is a residential vein, tight corners, children on bicycles. Speeding, 55 miles per hour in a 25 zone. A low murmur ripples through the benches behind Preston. 55 in a 25 isn't a momentary lapse. It is a deliberate choice. The clerk continues, her tone sharpening just a fraction. Reckless driving, cutting off a school bus, failure to yield to emergency signals, ignoring an officer's command. She takes a breath, looking up briefly over the rim of her spectacles before delivering the final line. Verbal abuse of a law enforcement official. The list hangs in the air, a heavy cloud of entitlement. Most defendants shrink under such a recitation. They study their shoes. They wring their hands until the knuckles turn white. They whisper apologies to the floorboards. Preston Hayes III does none of these things. He stands at the podium, leaning on one elbow as if he were ordering a drink at a country club bar. Before the clerk can even set the file down, Preston chuckles. It is a dry, hollow sound that scrapes against the court's decorum. He shakes his head, the movement practiced and dismissive, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Okay, hold on," he interrupts, his voice projecting confidently, far too loud for the solemnity of the municipal court. "That sounds way dramatic. It was just a little acceleration. The car has a sensitive engine." He waves a hand vaguely in the air. "And I didn't see any bus. Honestly, the officer was just being emotional. He was screaming before he even got to the window." Judge Frank Caprio has not moved. He sits high on the bench, his hands clasped tightly over the polished wood. He doesn't blink. He doesn't frown. He just watches. In the Providence Municipal Court, silence is often the loudest reprimand, and Caprio lets the silence stretch until it becomes uncomfortable for everyone but the boy. He is studying Preston, the slouch, the expensive watch catching the fluorescent light, the complete and total lack of fear. Most people see a judge and feel the weight of the law. Preston sees an inconvenience to be managed. Caprio's eyes, usually warm with the grandfatherly wisdom that has endeared him to millions, have gone dark and still. He is measuring the vast distance between the boy's perception of the world and the hard reality of the pavement. The air conditioning hums, the flag fringe barely stirs, and the court reporter's fingers hover frozen over the keys. The judge isn't looking at the docket anymore. He is looking straight into the vacuum of responsibility standing before him, his expression unreadable, yet profoundly deep. The silence following Preston's dismissal hung in the air like smoke, thick and uncomfortable. But before Judge Caprio could respond to the boy's cavalier attitude, a movement stirred in the back row. It wasn't a lawyer shifting a briefcase or an officer adjusting a belt. It was Mrs. Evelyn Crawford, rising slowly, her knees popping audibly in the quiet room. She wore a modest plaid dress that had seen better decades, the fabric worn soft at the elbows, and she held a handbag with both hands as if it were an anchor keeping her from drifting away. Judge Caprio, whose attention had been laser-focused on the young heir, softened immediately. He raised a hand, halting the clerk. "Ma'am?" he asked, his voice dropping that characteristic octave into gentleness. "Did you witness the incident?" Evelyn navigated the aisle with the caution of someone who knows that bones don't heal as fast as they used to. She approached the bench, standing a few feet from Preston, who didn't even bother to turn his head to acknowledge her existence. "I did, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was thin, trembling not with anger, but with the residual vibration of a terror that hadn't quite left her bones. She didn't shout. She didn't point a shaking finger. She simply painted a picture. "I was crossing Elm Street," she began, looking at the judge, not the boy. "I had the walk signal. I always wait for the signal. I was halfway across when I heard it. Not a car, but a roar." She paused, taking a breath that seemed to catch in her chest. "He didn't swerve, Judge. He didn't brake. The wind from his car, it almost knocked me over. I felt the heat of the engine on my legs." The courtroom, usually a place of shuffling papers and whispered pleas, was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn continued, her eyes watering slightly under the fluorescent lights. And then the bus, the yellow school bus. It was turning. This young man. He cut right in front of it. I heard the tires scream. I saw the children's faces pressed against the glass, jerking forward. She looked down at her hands, wringing the strap of her bag. "It wasn't a mistake, Your Honor. It felt like he didn't care if we were there at all. It was just fear. Pure fear." Preston rolled his eyes, checking his cuticles, a gesture so detached it was almost violent in its indifference. But the room wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at Evelyn, a grandmother who had simply gone out for bread and come back with a memory of death passing inches from her skin. Judge Caprio didn't speak immediately. He let her words settle, heavy and undeniable, transforming the abstract charges on the paper into a terrifying reality of steel and speed. The sympathy in the room was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on the arrogance standing at the podium. Judge Frank Caprio allows the silence to settle over the courtroom like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He offers a slow, deliberate nod to Mrs. Evelyn Crawford, a gesture that transcends the procedural necessity of a municipal hearing and touches on genuine human gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," he says softly, his voice warm enough to melt the frost in the air. "You may return to your seat." As the elderly woman navigates the aisle, clutching her purse with trembling hands, the judge's gaze shifts. It moves from the warmth of empathy to something far colder, locking on to the young man at the podium. Preston Hayes III is still leaning casually against the wood, the posture of someone waiting for a valet rather than a verdict. He taps a finger against the side of his expensive smartphone, a rhythmic, impatient tick that seems deafening in the sudden quiet. Judge Caprio places his pen down. The click against the mahogany bench is sharp, a punctuation mark in the stillness. He interlaces his fingers, leaning forward until the harsh light from the high windows catches the stern lines of his forehead. When he speaks, his voice has dropped an octave. It is quiet, stripped of all theatricality, yet it carries a tensile strength that straightens the spines of the people in the back row. "Mr. Hayes," Caprio begins, the name landing with the weight of a gavel strike. "You stand there and tell me about minor accelerations and emotional officers. You speak as if the laws of physics suspend themselves for your convenience." The judge pauses, letting the words hang in the recycled air, forcing Preston to listen to the hum of the ventilation system. "Do you understand the mathematics of tragedy, son? A vehicle moving at 55 miles per hour in a school zone doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask for a last name or check a bank balance before impact. It destroys." Caprio gestures toward the gallery, where the school bus driver sits, arms crossed, watching intently. "These people, Mrs. Crawford, that driver, they are simply trying to get home. They are trying to survive the day. You treated their safety as an obstacle to your adrenaline." Preston shifts his weight, finally looking uncomfortable as the judge's stare drills into him, peeling back the layers of arrogance. Caprio continues, his tone unrelenting. "I know your father. I know the governor respects the burden of service. But let me be very clear. That respect is not hereditary. The license in your pocket does not carry a diplomatic immunity clause. Privilege, Mr. Hayes, is a tool, not a shield. When you use it to endanger the very people your family is sworn to serve, you aren't just breaking a traffic law, you are breaking the social contract." The judge picks up the file again, his eyes never leaving Preston's face. "So, I have to ask, before we go any further, do you actually understand what civic duty means? Or do you think it's just a phrase people use when they want your vote?" Judge Caprio doesn't argue. He doesn't raise his voice to match the boy's casual dismissal or the cavalier wave of a hand that suggests the law is merely a suggestion. Instead, he leans back, the heavy leather of his chair creaking just enough to be heard in the sudden lull. He gestures to the clerk, a single practiced motion that regulars know means the end of the debate. "Let's go to the video," Caprio says, his tone devoid of theater but heavy with intent. "The camera doesn't have emotions, Mr. Hayes. It doesn't exaggerate. It just remembers." The mood in the room shifts instantly. The courtroom lights seem to dim as the large monitor mounted on the side wall flickers to life. The grainy white timestamp in the corner reads 15:45:02. Static clears to reveal the hood of a patrol cruiser, the siren's wail muted but implied by the frantic flashing of red and blue reflections bouncing off the wet asphalt of Elm Street. Ahead, traffic is moving at a polite suburban crawl until a black blur tears into the frame from the left. It's a sleek, imported sports coupe, low to the ground, weaving through the lanes like a needle stitching a jagged, violent line through fabric. On the benches, the audience leans in collectively. A young mother in the second row tightens her grip on her purse. Mrs. Crawford presses a trembling hand to her mouth. The video shows the coupe swerve right, completely ignoring the cruiser's lights. Then comes the moment that sucks the oxygen out of the room. A yellow school bus, heavy and slow, is merging from a side street. The black car doesn't brake. It accelerates. It cuts across the bus's nose with mere inches to spare. The bus lurches visibly on screen, its nose diving sharply as the driver slams the emergency brakes, the rear tires smoking in a pixelated cloud of burnt rubber. You can almost hear the scream of the tires through the silence of the court. But the footage isn't over. As the cruiser gains ground, the coupe's driver's side window rolls down. An arm extends, Preston's arm, clad in that same expensive designer fabric he wears now. He isn't signaling surrender. He isn't waving an apology. He throws something back, a cup, a wrapper, that strikes the cruiser's windshield with a dull thud, followed immediately by a single finger raised in a gesture that needs no translation. It is a portrait of pure, unadulterated contempt. Judge Caprio signals, and the screen snaps to black. The hum of the projector fan seems deafening in the vacuum left behind. No one coughs. No one shuffles their feet. The silence is heavy, thick with the weight of what could have happened. The veteran in the back row creates a small sound of disgust, shaking his head slowly. The image of that yellow bus, lurching under the weight of terrified children, hangs in the air long after the pixels have faded. Caprio lets the silence do the heavy lifting. He doesn't speak immediately. He lets the room breathe in the danger that was just displayed. The video has stripped away the emotional officer defense in 45 seconds of high-definition truth, leaving only the stark reality of a 16-year-old playing roulette with other people's lives. The blue glow of the monitor washes over Preston Hayes III, turning his summer tan into a sickly pallor. A moment ago, he was leaning against the podium like it was a hotel bar, the posture of someone waiting for service, not a verdict. Now, that architecture collapses. On the screen, the digital timestamp races, and the black sports car weaves through traffic with a violence that looks horrific in playback. The silence in the Providence courtroom is heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the wooden benches. The only sound is the faint whir of the projector fan and the jagged breathing of a young man who suddenly looks very much like a child caught in a lie. Preston tries to look away. His eyes dart to the glowing exit sign, to the scuffed floor tiles, anywhere but the evidence. But the camera doesn't blink. It captures the precise moment his arm extends from the window in that obscene gesture. A frozen, pixelated testament to entitlement. The smile that had been plastered on his face since he walked in, that smirk of guaranteed immunity, dissolves. It doesn't just fade. It falls off, leaving behind a blank, terrified realization. He swallows hard, the movement visible above the collar of his designer sweatshirt. The expensive phone in his hand, previously a prop of his indifference, now hangs loosely at his side, forgotten. Judge Frank Caprio reaches out and presses a button. The screen snaps to black. The sudden absence of the video sucks the oxygen out of the room. The overhead fluorescents hum back to life, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the sweat now beading on Preston's hairline. The courtroom remains dead silent. No papers rustle. Even the clerk seems suspended in the tension. The transition from the chaotic speed of the footage to the stillness of the bench is jarring. Frank Caprio doesn't speak immediately. He lets the silence do the heavy lifting. He adjusts his glasses, his eyes locked on the young man who is now gripping the sides of the podium for support. When the judge finally speaks, his voice is not loud. It carries the low, resonant frequency of absolute authority, cutting through the lingering atmosphere. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio says, the words dropping like lead weights. "Look at me." Preston lifts his head, his defiance replaced by a hollow dread. "What we just saw," the judge continues, his tone flat, stripping away the earlier patience, "is not a little acceleration. It is not the result of an emotional officer misinterpreting a situation." Caprio leans forward, clasping his hands over the file. "That was a weapon on wheels. That was a conscious decision to endanger the lives of Mrs. Crawford, those children on the bus, and everyone else on Elm Street." Preston opens his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another spin, but the words die in his throat. There is no room for charm here. "This is not a traffic violation, son," Caprio says, his voice dipping quieter but hitting harder. "This is irresponsibility bordering on a crime. You treated the public road like a private playground, and the people on it like obstacles in a game. And that game is over. The projector fan spins down, a dying mechanical wheeze that leaves the courtroom in a heavy, sterile silence. Preston Hayes III stands at the podium, but the swagger has leaked out of him, pooling somewhere on the worn linoleum floor near his expensive designer sneakers. He looks smaller now, stripped of the invisible armor that a famous last name usually provides. Judge Frank Caprio doesn't shout. He doesn't pound the gavel. He simply folds his hands over the thick case file, a gesture of deliberate patience that feels more intimidating than a scream. The air conditioner kicks on, rattling a loose vent overhead, counting off the seconds of Preston's discomfort. "Mr. Hayes," Caprio begins, his voice low, carrying to the back benches without effort. "I could fine you $500. I could fine you $1,000. But we both know who pays that. Your father writes a check, the city cashes it, and you learn absolutely nothing except that mistakes have a price tag you can afford." The judge leans forward, his glasses catching the harsh overhead light. "In this court, we don't sell get-out-of-jail-free cards. We trade in a different currency, time and understanding." Preston shifts his weight, his eyes fixed on the wood grain of the podium, knuckles white. He's waiting for the hammer drop. "Here is the judgment," Caprio says, picking up his pen. The scratching sound is loud in the quiet room. "The monetary fine is suspended. I am not interested in your father's money. I am interested in your character." He looks up, locking eyes with the teenager. "For the next 30 days, you will report to the Providence Veterans Shelter. Not at noon. Not when it's convenient. You will be there at 5 a.m. sharp." A ripple of whispers moves through the gallery. Mrs. Crawford adjusts her glasses, surprised. Preston blinks, the reality of the hour sinking in like a stone. "You will help prepare breakfast," Caprio continues, listing the duties like ingredients in a recipe for humility. "You will mop the floors where men who fought for your freedom walk. You will listen to their stories. You will scrub pots. And you will do it every single morning before you go to your private school." The judge pauses, letting the image settle. "And finally, you will write me an essay. 2,000 words on the definition of civic responsibility and leadership. Not copied from the internet. From your head. From what you see at 5 a.m., when the world is dark and cold." The judge closes the folder with a definitive thud. "You have lived a life where doors open because of your name. Now, you will learn to hold the door open for others. Do you understand the terms?" Preston nods, a jerky, mechanical motion, his voice barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good," Caprio says, his expression softening just a fraction, the grandfather returning to replace the magistrate. "Don't look at this as punishment, son. Look at it as an introduction to the real world. See you in 30 days. 4 weeks peel away like pages on the calendar, yet the courtroom remains a capsule of timeless routine. The air conditioner still rattles its rhythmic complaint. The gallery still holds the collective breath of 50 anxious citizens clutching tickets. But when the name Hayes is called this time, the air shifts. The door doesn't bang open. There is no cavalcade of arrogance, no flamboyant entrance designed to turn heads. Preston Hayes III walks to the microphone with a stride that is measured, almost hesitant. The $1,000 sneakers are replaced by scuffed work boots that have seen rain and mud. The designer logo is gone, swapped for a plain gray cotton shirt that hangs loosely on a frame slightly thinned by labor. He folds his hands on the podium, hands that look red, scrubbed raw, and waits. He doesn't look at the ceiling or his phone, he looks at the bench. Judge Caprio leans forward, peering over the rim of his glasses. He studies the boy the way a jeweler inspects a stone for cracks, looking for the flaw he saw a month ago. "Mr. Hayes," the judge says, his tone lacking the sharp edge of their last encounter. "You've completed the 30 days. How was the view from 5 a.m.? Preston clears his throat. It's a dry, humble sound. "It was cold, Your Honor," he admits. "I didn't know the city was awake that early, or that so many people were hungry by 6. He pauses, his eyes tracking a memory only he can see. "They put me in the scullery first. Industrial pots. Grease traps. I thought it was a punishment." He looks up, meeting Caprio's gaze. "Then I met Mr. Henderson. He's 82. He comes in for coffee because his heat got cut off. He told me about the Tet Offensive while I was mopping the floor." The courtroom is silent. The clerk has stopped typing. "I used to think power was making people move out of your way," Preston says, his voice cracking slightly. "But, Mr. Henderson, he moved out of the way for me so I could sweep under his chair. He apologized to me. I realized then that I've never really worked for anything. The eggs, the clean floors, it matters. It matters because they matter." The smirk is extinct. In its place is a quiet, exhausted dignity. The silence in the Providence Municipal Courtroom is heavy, but it is no longer tense. It is the quiet of a lesson landing. Preston Hayes III stands at the podium, the expensive hoodie replaced by a simple button-down that looks like it has seen an iron, not a dry cleaner. His hands, once busy with a smartphone, now rest still on the wood. Judge Frank Caprio leans back in his high leather chair, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He isn't looking at the court docket. He is studying the young man's face, searching for the sneer that had defined their first meeting. It isn't there. The arrogance that had once filled the room like a noxious gas has evaporated, replaced by the tired clarity of someone who has spent 30 mornings scrubbing floors and listening to stories of men who gave everything. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Caprio says, his voice dropping to that signature, conversational register that transforms the bench into a confessional. "A month ago, I saw a young man who thought the rules were suggestions. I saw someone who thought his last name was a shield." The judge pauses, letting the hum of the ventilation system fill the gap. "Today, I don't see that boy. I see a young man who understands that respect isn't inherited. It is earned, usually the hard way." Preston nods, his eyes fixed on the judge, not darting to the exit. "I understand, Your Honor," he says, and for the first time, the words carry weight. The judge picks up his pen. It is a simple black instrument, but in this room, it holds the weight of fate. "I have read the letters from the shelter director," Caprio continues, tapping a stack of papers. "They tell me you didn't just show up. You listened. You served." He looks up, locking eyes with the governor's son. "I could fine you $500. Your father would pay it before lunch, and you would learn nothing. But the currency we trade in here isn't always dollars. It is trust. It is character." The scratching of the pen against the paper is loud in the quiet room. Scritch, scratch, tap. "The court finds that the debt has been paid," Caprio announces, his tone final but warm. "Not to the city treasury, but to the community you endangered. The fines are dismissed. Completely." A ripple of surprise moves through the backbenches. The regulars know Caprio is fair, but total dismissal for such an offense is rare. It is a reward not for the driving, but for the awakening. "Take the lessons from that shelter with you," Caprio says, handing the file to the clerk. "Real power isn't about driving fast or who your father is. It's about lifting up the people standing next to you. Don't let this lesson fade when you walk out those doors. I won't, Preston replies. Good luck, son, Caprio says, turning his attention to the next file, effectively ending the transaction. As Preston turns to leave, his stride is different. Less of a strut, more of a walk. He passes Mrs. Crawford in the back row and offers a genuine, apologetic nod. The side door opens, letting in a slice of the bustling city outside, and as it closes behind him, the room feels lighter. The heavy machinery of justice having produced not a punishment, but a person.